Phil Anderson in the studio here, the Libertarian candidate for U.S. Senate. He will be on everybody's ballot.
That's correct.
November 5th.
Everybody in Wisconsin will have a chance to vote for freedom.
So we're hitting some of the issues here, and the take from a different standpoint is nice to have to compare to. Let's talk about Medicare and Social Security. This is one of those things that I see runs the gamut in public opinion. I paid in, I deserve it. I always say, well, okay, we'll give you back what you paid in. It ain't going to last very long. That kind of stuff. You know, so there's all that stuff that's out there.
Exactly.
And really, the fight now has become how they're going to continue to sustain this past the, now yesterday I just heard it was 8 years. But whatever window it is when they finally run out of
They say
cash.
whatever number is the scariest, I think, right? But still somewhat realistic.
And they're gonna, and then we're gonna have to do something. And everyone says they're not gonna cut anything. And most people suggest that nobody's benefits should be decreased and the retirement age should not be raised. And in fact, we should add more stuff that it covers. And then nobody does anything and nobody knows how to pay for it. And pretty soon we're going to get to where the cliff comes. Yeah. What is your view of the programs themselves and what they're supposed to be for? And should we continue to?
Well, let's start the one that's a little more nuanced, and that's Medicare.
Okay.
Let's talk about health care in general. We can loop in the Affordable Care Act, et cetera. Those are basically just a handout to the insurance industry. If people want the most effective health care, most people want either, if they're far left, they want single payer health care. Mm-hmm. So they want the government to just do it all, right? And not have the insurance companies involved necessarily. Or people like me would want free market health care and not want the government involved. Either of those cases would result in, and I think single payer health care would be a disaster, but it's at least a philosophically pure idea of let's have the government do it. In my case, let's have individuals take care of their own business. Mm-hmm. And the reason that we have what we have is because the insurance lobby is in control of Congress, just like the other lobbies are. So they build this monstrosity that, in fact, does cover a few more people, but is a lot more expensive for a lot of people, including when I was on the exchange a few years ago, my costs were much higher. And a lot of times has limited coverage, all for the benefit of the insurance lobby. Now, Medicare, to me, is something that I don't have a problem, like practically having some supports for people that fall through the cracks. I think that's government's not the best way to do it, but if that's what people vote for, I don't object to that as the purpose of it. But the idea that it becomes a primary way of people to get health care is just a perversion of the whole idea of what it's supposed to be in the first place. And anytime, like, I'll give you an example too. My main health care right now is through a primary care clinic in Middleton, in Madison. And primary care clinics don't use insurance. So you pay a subscription every month, and mine is like $100 or so, a little less than $100. And all of my doctor visits, almost whenever I want, I'm getting prescriptions, basic testing, all that is covered under that $100. And I email my doctor and he emails me back right away and we can text each other, et cetera, et cetera. Healthcare in and of itself is not as expensive as it seems to be for people that are using health insurance, because health insurance itself drives up costs. There's no reason for health insurance to be involved in basic everyday doctor visits and prescriptions, et cetera, in the same way that you don't need car insurance to get your oil changed. But it's taken over the health insurance or the healthcare industry to such a point that now people talk about healthcare and health insurance as if it were the same thing.
There's the talk that healthcare should be a right, like your right to free speech and your right to.
Let's not confuse this. I think everybody should have healthcare, ideally, yes, and education and lots of other things. But something ceases to be a right at the point at which you're forcing somebody else to provide it. So if you believe it's a right that people have, secondary education, college education, health care, whatever it might be, it's not a right by definition, because you're making somebody else give of their own time, labor, education, expertise, whatever, to provide that to you. That's not a right. That's tyranny.
Well, it's an interesting point, because free speech is one of those that you can't do that with, although they're trying now within social media and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but that's a good example, because people have the right to express themselves. That doesn't cost anybody else anything.
Right.
I'm not requiring, the extension of free speech might be, from that kind of skewed philosophical viewpoint, would be, I have free speech, therefore I should come on Tim Bremel show whenever I want, and he's got to give a chair for me and make his listeners listen to me. That's not free speech, and nobody believes that to be a right. It's the idea of what needs to be provided for that right to happen. And if it's somebody else's time, money, expertise, whatever it is, it's simply not by definition a right. And that's not to say that libertarians and most people think that people shouldn't have health care, education, et cetera. We do, absolutely. But we recognize that the government is a particularly bad way for people to get that. And that's been borne out historically. Now we can transition to Social Security, a program that's failed on its face, and I would argue was intended to be a Ponzi scheme from the beginning, from the time it started. Anytime the government takes money, or anytime anybody takes money from you, says we'll hold on to it for you and pay it back to you at a certain time in the future, and they're not paying interest on it, and in the meantime they're using that money for other things, who would sign up for that, knowing that's exactly how it works? And why should you be required to sign up for it? You don't have a choice to opt out of Social Security. So they take your money, they forcefully take your money, they abuse it, and now they're saying they don't have enough money to pay people out in a few years. Right now, people should be able to opt out of that and say, look, I'll ask nothing of the government in terms of Social Security when I get to be that age, but I want to take control of my investment for my retirement and take responsibility for that. And then that would be more fair, that would be more solvent, and then the people that have paid in already can be paid out. That's fine. But even then, they've already been wronged. It's not as if they're getting justice by receiving their Social Security, because that money has already been stolen, it's already been spent, and now it's being taxed. So they're borrowing money and printing money to pay out people's Social Security.
Yeah, it's kind of become the United States pension plan, in that you're going to end up, if you live much longer than the average, you're going to get way more out of that program than you ever put into that program.
Well, think of it this way. Let's say I make Tim Bremel, by force of law, by force of the Social Security law, lend me money. So then I spend that money, and when it's time to pay you back, I take out a credit card debt to pay you back. Is that sustainable?
No, and that's a good way to put it.
That's exactly what's, I mean, that's not even, it's an analogy, but it's really, really accurate. And then I take that credit card debt and I pass it along to my kids to pay you off.
And it never gets paid off, which is why we have the problem that we have.
Precisely.
Elections.
There's one coming up.
Easy to vote, hard to cheat. Which is more important? And what do you think about the integrity of our current system?
The system, people ask me a lot about the 2020 election in particular. And I'll tell you that I don't know exactly what happened with that one, but they've all been crooked for a while. And not just voting day. The fact that the two main parties select and vet and screen the candidates, and they're the only ones that you're allowed to vote for in the first place, is already screwed up. And this election cycle has been worse than ever. We saw the primary process for presidential elections for both the Democrats and Republicans. It wasn't a primary in either party.
No.
They purposefully excluded candidates. Trump wouldn't debate. The Democrats made Bobby Kennedy's trying to campaign illegal. They ignored Phillips. They kept Marianne Williamson off the ballot in other states by lawfare. It was basically set up to be a straightforward coronation of those candidates so that they could be on the ballot. And let's not ignore what happened in Wisconsin this election cycle, too. The primaries for state assembly were controversial on the Republican side because Robin Vos raised a bunch of money through some less than ethical means, I would say, in my opinion, in order to prop up the candidates who are compliant with his program in the state assembly. And those candidates who ran as Republicans and who were backed by people calling themselves patriots and volunteers and et cetera, were excluded and drowned in campaign funds from the other side. So it happens everywhere. It's all one problem. That being said, the idea that there needs to be one or the other is a false choice. We can have, if we use technology, we can have elections that aren't being defrauded. If we use regular banking technology, just like all of us use, spend, well, not us necessarily, but there's trillions of dollars that travel through the banking system without fraud every day. There's no reason that people can't vote using that technology. And then for access to that, there's no reason that people can't go to the polls on election day or access somewhere where they log in, where their identity is verified somehow in the same way that if they're receiving government benefits or driving a car or whatever it might be, find a way to verify their identity so they can't vote twice. And on the back end, the technology prevents that as well, and make that as open as possible, as available as humanly possible, which should be almost 100%. Anybody that wants to vote can vote in the way that I'm conceiving of it. But at the same time, the back end prevents double voting and cheating and those sorts of things where 30,000 ballots show up in Milwaukee on election night in 2018 at like 1 a.m, or in other places where all of a sudden ballots are discovered and voting machines don't seem to work right and that sort of thing. We can get rid of all of that if we want to. But again, it's one of those issues, like so many others, that Republicans and Democrats would rather argue about as something to yell about during election season rather than actually solve it. I mean, immigration is the same thing. There's lots of other issues that they could solve and have solutions for, but they'd rather have things to yell about and run nasty commercials about.
When you talk about a smaller government, what would you see as something that could be jettisoned now? For instance, I hate to even bring it up because people are falsely connecting it to things, but in Project 2025, and they have confirmed this, the Heritage Foundation, they seek to eliminate the U.S. Department of Education.
Well, that's a really good example, and I've been advocating for that for 10 years, and other people have well before there was ever a Project 2025. It's pretty simple. First of all, if we use what the Constitution says that government should be for, then a lot of these federal agencies wouldn't exist, and they don't need to exist for the most part. The Department of Education is a particularly good case because it was formed in 1980 or 81. Since then, education hasn't improved at all in the United States. As a matter of fact, it's gotten worse. And so we see that as a way for the federal government to control things that can be done very easily by the states with more accountability, more innovation, and more ability to actually address the issues that are going on in different states. I mean, education is a different issue. There are different demographics. There are different cultural things in every state. So why not have states or even more local units of government handle their own education and not have the federal Department of Education involved at all? It doesn't need to exist, but there are others too. The CIA is way out of control, and and when Eisenhower left office in 1960, he warned us of that. There's no reason it's as big and pervasive as it needs to be. The NSA is spying on us all. That needs to go away. What does the Department of Energy do? I mean, there's a lot of questions. And to me, and I think the common sense way to look at it is look at an agency. What is it supposed to be doing? Is it doing that? How much is it spending? Is that money well spent? And then Congress should be making decisions about it. Now, again, this is going to sound like a broken record, but Congress doesn't do that. They don't respond that way. The Department of Energy, the FDA, the Department of Education, all these departments make rules that benefit donors, so they're not going to get rid of them. Heavens no. They're going to keep them funded and keep lying about how effective they are. And heaven forbid we suggest they be cut. They're going to defend them as if kids are going to stop learning how to read without the Department of Education, which is nonsense. But that's how the government actually works. And if we put some scrutiny on these agencies and expect them to produce results, we'll see that it's all virtue signaling and padding donors' pockets and not effective government.
We got just about 2 minutes left, Phil. Take those, use them how you like, but if you've got a wide audience here because there's a lot of people. I'm going back to a lot of polling before the Democratic candidate change, but still don't like the candidates, still don't like their choices, still feel like they're forced to vote for the lesser of two evils. You've got the whole audience to convince that, hey, you could come over to our place. What do you say?
That's true. I mean, Tammy Baldwin is a generic empty pantsuit. She's done very little in terms of leadership and leading on things. She's led on LGBTQ issues, which is great. I support that. But other than that, she's done nothing but toe the line in terms of Democratic, passing the buck to her donors. Eric Hovde, what can I say? He's a good guy. I think you had him on yesterday. He's a good guy, but he has no history of activism, no history of standing up for anything. He hasn't even lived in Wisconsin. And even if it's true that he's been in California for 12 years and before that for 20 in DC, but he hasn't done anything. He has no record of fighting against COVID, vaccine mandates or shutdowns or anything like that, fighting against tax policy in California, et cetera. They're just the generic representatives of their party. And I suggest that people, rather than look just at this election cycle, and it's true I'm a long shot, look beyond and say, what does a candidate like me in a defeat, but at 5%, 10%, 15%, what does that do to the future of the ideas that I represent and the future of representative government in America? And that sends a message to people. It sends a message to the government that things need to change.
Well, we'll see what happens. We wish you much luck in the November election. It's going to be an interesting one for us all. And we'll probably see you around. I know you're on the campaign trail a lot.
Yes, sir.
It's a big state to cover.